Hello, welcome to my favourite albums of 2023 video. Been a couple years since I've done one of these, and I'm going to do it in a bit of a different format than I previously did it before. Previously, I would edit loads of clips of the albums, music videos and live videos and stuff with the songs. So I'm just going to run through all the albums, talk a little briefer than I previously would have done about each one. So yeah, we're just going to plough through my top 10 albums of the year, talk about some other honourable mentions, some other albums that I really liked that didn't crack the top 10. Before we get into the top 10, let's start off with some of my honourable mentions, just albums that I did really like, or in some cases really loved, that didn't end up in that top 10. It was quite a tough list to whittle it down on because there were so many albums that I adored from this year that just didn't make it into that top 10. We've got the new Troye Sivan album, Something to Give Each Other, which I think is one of the sexiest and most fun pop albums of the year. Travis Scott's Utopia is probably one of my favourite albums of the year in terms of production. The new Bombay Bicycle Club album, My Big Day, was a real surprise. I've never really loved one of their albums. Pretty much all of their albums I've quite liked, but only really loved the singles. But this was an album where pretty much every single song was a standout track. I want to give a shout out to Beloved Paradise Jazz by McKinley Dixon, which was this really interesting sort of jazz rap album that I had a real blast with when I listened to. An album that really surprised me was the Lil Yachty album, Let's Start Here, which is the rapper Lil Yachty basically making a Tame Impala album. It's just a real love letter to prog and psychedelic rock, which was not what I was expecting at all. I quite liked the new Olivia Rodrigo album, Guts. It kind of just felt like more of her first album, which I did really like as well. I think I do prefer the songs on her first album, but there's definitely a sign of progression here. You can tell she's getting stronger as a songwriter. I really liked the new Joanna Sternberg album, I've Got Me, which is just this really short to the point collection of these really cutesy little intimate folk songs. Desire, I Want to Turn Into You by Caroline Polachek was one that I quite enjoyed, but definitely nowhere near as much as other people seem to. So Much for Stardust, new Fall Out Boy album. Real surprise there. It's nice to have Fall Out Boy making music that doesn't suck. Speaking of great times, my last album I want to shout out is not that. Suicide and Sunshine, the new Trophy Eyes album, which was one of the most heart-wrenching and just depressing albums I heard all year. My number 10 slot goes to Dead Club City by Nothing But Thieves. This is quite an interesting diversion for the band, kind of stepping a little bit away from the indie rock, alt rock sort of sounds that we've known from them previously, heading much more into a bit of a synthy sort of direction. You can tell that there's a lot of influence from sort of 80s synth pop and electronic music just generally, but they also still do have that rock sort of side. In fact, some of the band's heaviest material actually shows up on this thing, like Pop the Balloon is probably the heaviest, most hard rocking sort of song that they've done in a long time. This album did take a few listens for me, to be completely honest. I didn't really love it straight away, and even now there's songs on it that I don't really love, but it's kind of one of those where the highlights of the album are so strong that it keeps sucking me back in. Overcome probably being maybe even a contender for my favourite song by them now. It's great to see the band are still very forward thinking, still trying to push boundaries when it comes to their own songwriting. It's great to see them just, experimenting and progressing rather than just making the same sort of thing over and over again. This is very different to their previous 3 albums, but it feels very much like a Nothing But Thieves album. It's not out of place in their discography. Number 9, Scaring the Hoes, Danny Brown, JPEG Mafia. This was one of the big blockbuster releases of the year, one of the most critically acclaimed and successful albums of the year, and for very good reason, because it is fucking great. JPEG Mafia and Danny Brown are both two of the most unique and individual voices in modern hip-hop at the moment, so for them to come together with this really chaotic, schizophrenic, all over the place sort of experimental hip-hop album, it's really great to see. Much of the production is based around samples, and JPEG Mafia's kind of stretching the boundaries of what you can do when it comes to sample-based hip-hop music. It is very loud and discordant, but it's so exciting and fun to listen to. There's never a dull moment on this. It never like slows down or anything. It's just complete chaos beginning to end. Production is incredible. All of the lyrics and verses from JPEG and Danny Brown are just so good. This is just such a subversive and wild album that at points kind of almost like verges into sort of punk rap sort of territory. It's obviously not going to be an album that's for everyone. I think it's very much a Marmite sort of album where you either love it or it's not for you at all, but I loved it. It's been one of the ones that I've been kind of rinsing all year. But yeah, there's a good reason why this is ending up top of a lot of people's year-end lists this year. Number 8, we got This Is Why by Paramore, kind of continuing on with what After Laughter and the self-titled album did, stepping away much more from the pop-punk, emo-pop sort of sound of their earlier material into more of a post-punk, alt-rock sort of sound. One of the things that I love about this album so much is they kind of blend all these different musical styles in a very cohesive sort of way, where 1 second you've got like a funky sort of Talking Heads-esque sort of track, and then the next second you've got much more of a downbeat, mellow, almost Radiohead sounding song. I know they've not been afraid to admit that they wear their influences very much on their sleeves on this album, but there's very rarely a point on the album where it sounds like they're just copying other people. They do take heavy influence from other bands and other musicians, but the way that they portray it on this album still feels very distinctive of Paramore. This is undeniably a Paramore album, and it kind of shows them just on absolute their strongest form. Songs like the title track and The News and You First and Figure Eight, some of my favourite songs that they've ever done. Even if you're not a fan of Paramore's music, but you are into new wave and post-punk sort of bands like, you know, Devo or Talking Heads back in the day, or some of the revival bands like Block Party in the 2000s, I would highly recommend this because it is much more sounding like that than anything they've done before. And I do hope that it's just a sign of things to come for the band, and I'm really excited for whatever they do next because they're just on a real roll at the moment. At number 7, we've got The Ballad of Darren by Blur. As some of you who will have watched the shorts will know, that I got really into Blur this year and I reviewed every single one of their albums as I listened to all their albums for the first time. And this, their big new comeback album, does actually rank up there for me in terms of their music. This is much more of a mellow, downbeat, sort of calming sort of record, although it does have more of the sort of punkier sort of stuff with St. Charles Square. A lot of it is very moody and very dark almost. Damon Albarn's lyrics are much more personal and introspective than they've ever been before, and it leads to some of the most emotionally captivating and beautiful songs that the band have ever done. Songs like St. Charles Square and The Narcissist were real highlights of the year for me, ones that I've just been listening to on loop. It's an album I've returned to quite a few times since getting into it and since it came out, and it's just one that it just gets better every time I listen to it. They also released a bonus track edition that had a couple of extra songs which actually were pretty much just as good as what was on the original album. If you go into this album expecting the much more upbeat, sort of catchy pop sounds that Blur are probably best known for, I think you will probably be a bit disappointed. While the songwriting and I think musicianship is really some of the best stuff they've ever done, it is very different. It is much more quiet and somber than anything they've ever done before. But I've personally thought it was just absolutely beautiful, and it does rank. I probably would consider it like a top 3 Blur album for me. At number 6, we have Take Me Back to Eden by Sleep Token. The fact that this didn't end up being my number 1 pick just kind of goes to show how great the other albums on this list are. Just from the second I put this album on when it came out, I just felt head over heels in love with it, as did lots and lots of people. Sleep Token's previous 2 albums were really, really solid, but for me, I think this album completely encapsulates exactly what they do best. This really unique and catchy blending of metal and pop and hip hop and shoegaze at points. It's a very dreamy sort of album at points, but it's also an incredibly biting and aggressive album. The band do such a great job of tying together the concept of the band and the concept of their albums, kind of bringing the story to a close in a way that calls back to their previous records in a really beautiful way. I think this is easily the most cohesive album they've ever done. There's not a single bad song on this album. Every single song is great. Frontman Vessel's vocal performance on this album is just phenomenal on every single song. The way he manages to blend all of these different vocal styles together, I think is just so interesting. You know, in one song he's rapping, the next one he's screaming, the next one he's, you know, singing in heavy falsetto, and at some points he's doing all 3 of those in the same song. It's very fitting that this is the album that really blew the band up into sort of an arena level band, because these songs do kind of sound like they were written specifically for that. They are very huge and grand and epic in scope, and the production and songwriting really encapsulates that. At points the songs are very moving and emotional, at points they're just a lot of fun and huge euphoric moments. The Summoning and the title track were probably right up there for my favourite songs of the year. They're just 2 that I've just played on absolute loop. The Summoning, I think, was one of my most streamed songs of the year as well, which does not surprise me because it was one that I listened to like 10 times a day for a few weeks when it came out. I'm glad other people are finally on the Sleep Token hype, because I think they're one of the most interesting and weird metal bands going at the moment, but I just find them so fun, so fascinating. They're one of the best in the game currently, in my opinion, and if you've not listened to this album, it's one that I would highly recommend. At number 5, we have the new Sufjan Stevens album, Javelin. For me, this is a real return to form for Sufjan. While I love Carrion Lowell, it's one of my favourite albums he's ever done, I've not really been a big fan of anything he's done since then, except for that collaborative album he did a couple years ago. But Javelin is just one of the most emotionally moving and beautiful records I heard all year. It really feels like a full celebration of everything that he's done so well throughout his career. It's like an encapsulation of all the different sounds that he's experimented with up until this point. A lot of the album is, of course, that very acoustic, folky sort of sounds that he's best known for, but there is a lot of the experimental electronic side as well, and I think the blending of the 2 just fits so perfectly. It's hard to talk about this album without obviously referencing the fact that a lot of it was inspired by the death of Sufjan's partner, and it leads to easily some of the most heartbreaking and vulnerable music that Sufjan has ever written. But one of the things that I find so beautiful about it is even though it is about all of these dark topics, it isn't just all doom and gloom. There is a shred of hopefulness and positivity as the album slowly creeps into its final moments. Obviously, because of the subject matter and because of how hard-hitting it is, it's not one that I've returned to loads. I have listened to it a couple times, and that's probably going to be it for a little bit, because it's a very hard listen, but it's a very rewarding and beautiful and just moving listen as well. It's easily one of my favourite albums he's ever done, and it's great to have him back on top form, making just such beautiful and heart-wrenching music. At At number 4, we've got the new Geese album, 3D Country. Geese are an American post-punk band who, with this album, have kind of reinvented their style and taken heavy influence from Southern rock. This is essentially a post-punk Southern rock cowboy album, and it's as weird and all over the place as it sounds. It's amazing how this band have managed to take such familiar sounds and make them sound like nothing I've ever heard in my life. It's so unique and different and fresh and exciting. It's really chaotic, but it's full of weirdly catchy melodies, something that their previous material hasn't really had. Some of the songs like just have straight up pop choruses, and it's so catchy. They're all like really huge sing-along hooks as well that have just led me to just listening to it constantly because it's just so much fun to listen to. It's one that I've listened to loads and loads of times, and I just don't get sick of it. I enjoy it more every time I listen to it because it's just such a blast. It's so fresh and new. It is a very eclectic and wild listen, but it's also, in my opinion, one of the most rewarding listens of the year. One that I just love more and more the more I listen to it. 2122, the title track, Cowboy Nudes, I See Myself, and Mysterious Love all probably could easily be in like a top 10 song of the year sort of video if I was to do that. I think this is another one where this isn't for everyone. It's kind of one that you're either going to completely gel with it and love what they're doing here, or it's just not going to be for you at all. And I completely understand if it's not for you because it is a very odd one. But for me, this is like exactly my kind of thing, and I fucking love it. And my number 3 album is the new Foo Fighters record, But Here We Are. I don't think any album emotionally devastated me as much as this one did. This is an album that honestly I can't listen to the whole way through without crying at least once. It's a very, very sad and heartbreaking record. The whole album's inspired by obviously the death of their drummer Taylor Hawkins, but also about the death of Dave Grohl's mother. The whole album kind of is very celebratory of their lives, but also just of the power of music and how it can help with grief. So although this is a very heart-wrenching and sad album, it's also very powerful and beautiful because just every song you can tell is just the band and writing music and using it to express these dark feelings that they don't know how to get out. Just in terms of the songwriting and performances, this is easily one of the best albums that the band have not only done in years, but just ever done throughout their whole career. This is just the band really sounding back on top form. It is much more reminiscent to their classic material over the sort of classic rock sort of sound of their last few albums. It's a shame we've not gotten anything this great from the band in a long time, and that something as horrible as what happened had to happen for us to get this. But nonetheless, some of my favourite songs of the year were from this, like Rescued, which is probably my favourite track of 2023. Yeah, this is one that when I do bring myself to listen to, I just always just fall deeper in love with. I could see this one day creeping up to become one of my top 3 favourite Foo Fighters albums, even though at the moment it's not that far off. It's so good. It is really great. At number 2, we have Live at Bush Hall by Black Country New Road. Although I didn't make a favourite albums of 2022 video, my favourite album was actually Black Country New Road's Ants From Up There, their last album. A few days after that album came out, their frontman Isaac Wood left the band, kind of leaving the future of the band very, very uncertain. They had a bunch of live commitments that they still wanted to uphold, but they didn't want to play any of the stuff that Isaac sang on. So they wrote a bunch of new material, and this is a live album of a performance of all that new material that they had written. And I think it just completely dispels any sort of doubts of the band's future after Isaac's departure. This album is just so masterful and so beautiful. Even though it's a live album, all of the songs are just so perfectly performed and written. They don't sound like they've been written in a very short amount of time. These are songs that do sound slaved over because they're so diversive and they're so massive and filled with so many unique tones and sounds. Musically, you can tell that there's a lot more influence from sort of 70s folk music, which comes through really well. A little bit of Kate Bush influence I'm hearing throughout as well. I think the songs on this album are catchier than ever, and they pretty much all have these really big, catchy pop sort of hooks, but kind of displayed in the way that you would expect Black Country New Road to display it. They have stepped, I think, away from the post-punk sort of sound that they started off doing, and this is kind of more of an expansion of the more folky and sort of jazzy sounds from their previous album. The way that they beautifully tie together these really intimate portraits of their friendship as a band and with Isaac, and kind of the experience of kind of moving on without him and using music as like a power of recovery. Very moving and beautiful the way they have woven all of that together. After this album, I'm very excited to see what the band do next. I imagine they've got some real great stuff coming out in the pipeline if this album is anything to go by, and I'm looking forward to whatever it is they do next. Yeah, favourite album of the year, Hell Mode, Jeff Rosenstock. I've been following Jeff Rosenstock's work since We Cool, which that and Worry, two of my favourite albums of all time. And Hell Mode, I don't want to say a return to form as if he's dropped off, because everything he's put out has been good, but this is easily the best album he's done since Worry, and a strong contender for maybe his best album to date. This album is a real celebration of the punk genre, kind of sprinkling in influences from all over the place. One second you might have a pop punk song, then a hardcore, then a ska song, which is something that Jeff has always done so well. So he's so good at blending these different punk sort of subgenres together in a way that feels very distinct of him. You never really get like whiplash from the being whipped around to the different sounds. It all feels very one as a whole, and this album I think just shows that off perfectly. Songwriting is clearly some of the most personal that Jeff has ever written, and every single song is just so good. I love that a lot of it is just, very short, snappy, to the point punk music, but then you'll have a song like Doubt, which is a much more of a huge, expansive sort of anthem, which is very emotionally captivating and moving. It's really great to see people in 2023 like Jeff Rosenstock making music that is just a real celebration of the genre and showing off, the limitations of what it can be. And there we go, those are my favourite albums of the year. A lot of big releases this year, obviously, that I've not gotten around to. Quite a lot of albums that I know if I sit down and listen to them, I'll love, but just haven't gotten around to it. And equally, a lot of albums on the honourable mentions, or even just on the list generally, are ones that I feel like I probably should have and could have listened to more, because a lot of them, I think, were growers. But thanks for watching this video till the end. It's good to be back. Hopefully this is the start of much more. I've got loads of videos recorded, ready to go. Just need to sit down, get them edited, get them out, and hopefully 2024 will be the year. We'll see. Let me know what your favourite albums of the year were. Maybe I'll check some of them out if I've not listened to them. But for now, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.